For 28 years, a fully registered airline existed in the United States of America. It had a website that listed ticket prices. It had a stock you could buy on the open market. It even owned a Boeing 747 jumbo jet. But in nearly 3 decades of existence, this airline never carried a single passenger, never delivered a single package, and never earned a single dollar of revenue. We know it failed. What nobody can seem to agree on is whether it was ever supposed to succeed. The airline was called Baltia Airlines, and on paper it looked like any other ambitious startup. It had a CEO, a business plan, offices, and a route map. It even had a frequent flyer program listed on its website for an airline with 0 flights. Baltia managed to attract real investors, real media attention, and at one point, a stock market valuation of over $40 million. All of this for a company that had never once put a plane in the sky with paying customers on board. And the strangest part is not that Baltia failed. Plenty of airlines fail. The strangest part is that Baltia kept going, year after year after year, always promising that flights were just around the corner. So what exactly was this company doing for 28 years? It starts in 1989. The Berlin Wall is falling, the Soviet Union is fracturing, and a pilot named Igor Dmitrovsky sees an opportunity. He founds Baltia Airlines with a genuinely compelling pitch to become the first US carrier offering non-stop flights from New York's JFK Airport to St. Petersburg, Russia. At the time, there's no direct service on that route. Cold War restrictions are dissolving, and suddenly, millions of Russian Americans want to visit the homeland they'd been cut off from for decades. By 1991, the US Department of Transportation actually grants Baltia permission to operate flights to St. Petersburg and Riga, with connecting service to Kiev, Minsk, and Tbilisi. For a brief window, this looks like a legitimately smart business move. But there's one problem. Dmitrovsky is a pilot, not a businessman. He has no airline operations experience, no fleet, and nowhere near enough capital to actually launch a transatlantic carrier. And within months, the Soviet Union collapses entirely, throwing every assumption about those routes into chaos. Despite all of this, Baltia doesn't fold. Instead, it does something remarkable. It keeps raising money. By 1996, the Department of Transportation reapproves Baltia's authority to fly the JFK to St. Petersburg route. The airline puts down a deposit on an ex-Cathay Pacific Boeing 747-200, one of the biggest commercial aircraft in the world. For the first time, it looks like this airline might actually take to the sky. But when regulators look at Baltia's finances, they find the airline simply does not have the money to complete the purchase. The DOT revokes the route authority. Now here's where it gets strange. Any normal startup would have folded at this point. Baltia doesn't. Instead, it goes quiet for over a decade, continuing to exist as a registered company, continuing to trade on the over-the-counter stock market, and continuing to promise investors that flights are imminent. Then, in 2009, Baltia announces it has purchased a Boeing 747-200 from Pakistan International Airlines. Investors are thrilled. There's just one detail. The plane has no engines. A 747 without engines is not an airplane. It is nearly 400,000 pounds of aluminum that cannot leave the ground. That engineless jet is eventually scrapped at a facility in Malaysia, thousands of miles from New York. But Baltia still doesn't quit. In 2011, the company buys another 747, this time from Northwest Airlines, and this one actually has engines. Baltia now owns a functioning jumbo jet. The company moves some of its operations to Willow Run Airport in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and reapplies for FAA operating certification. That certification process requires proving your airline can safely operate. Everything from crew training to emergency procedures. Baltia fails the evaluation, then fails it again, and again. 7 times in total, the FAA rejects Baltia's certification for various failures, culminating in a disastrous test where the aircraft's emergency slides wouldn't even deploy properly. 7 attempts over years, and they still can't pass on a plane they may already own. The 747 only ever flies a handful of times, strictly for maintenance and repositioning between Willow Run and a facility in Oscoda, Michigan. Those few flights, with no passengers on board, are the closest Baltia ever comes to operating an airline. By early 2016, the company announces it is retiring its only aircraft and will instead look to lease newer, more fuel-efficient planes. 27 years in, Baltia is back to having no airplane, no certification, and no flights. But by this point, the airline has somehow accumulated over $119 million in debt, and that number raises a question that changes everything about this story. How does a company that has never earned a single dollar manage to rack up $119 million in debt? The answer is the stock market, because Baltia was never just an airline sitting in a hangar. It was a publicly traded company on the OTC markets, selling shares to everyday investors for decades. Baltia's stock ticker was BLTA, and throughout the 2000s and 2010s, shares traded for pennies. The company issued press releases announcing partnerships, route plans, and aircraft acquisitions. It maintained a professional-looking website where you could browse ticket prices, read about their frequent flyer program, and even check their lost luggage policy, all for an airline that had never once been in the air. Every time Baltia made an announcement, the stock would spike. Small investors would buy in, believing they were getting in on the ground floor of the next big transatlantic carrier. At its peak in 2014, Baltia's market capitalization hit over $40 million. Over $40 million for a company whose only tangible asset was a 40-year-old jumbo jet parked at an airshow in Michigan. That year, the 747 sat on display at the Thunder over Michigan Airshow, while Baltia issued a press release calling itself the soon-to-be leading US airline in the transatlantic market. The release came with a small disclaimer at the bottom, noting that service was subject to receipt of government operating authority the company had been chasing for 25 years. Then, in March of 2016, the same week Baltia announced it was getting rid of its only plane, federal regulators made their move. The Securities and Exchange Commission charged Baltia's executive vice president and director of finance, Barry Clare, with securities fraud. The SEC alleged that Clare had been involved in manipulating the company's financial disclosures to mislead investors. The same investors who had been buying penny stocks for years, believing takeoff was just around the corner. The SEC's civil charges against Clare ripped the curtain back on what many aviation observers had suspected for years. This was not simply an airline that kept failing. The pattern was too convenient. Every few years, a new announcement, a new aircraft purchase, a new route application, each one generating just enough buzz to keep the stock active and money flowing in. The question investigators now faced was whether Baltia had ever genuinely intended to fly, or whether the entire airline was a mechanism for selling stock. And here's the detail that makes it almost impossible to answer. Igor Dmitrovsky, the founder, had died in January of 2016, just weeks before the SEC moved against Clare. He never saw the rebranding or the fallout. Dmitrovsky appears to have genuinely believed in his airline. He attended aviation events, he spoke about the St. Petersburg route with real passion, and he spent years navigating FAA bureaucracy. Either Dmitrovsky was one of the most committed con artists in American business history, or he was a dreamer who built something that other people figured out how to exploit. The story didn't end with the SEC's charges against Clare. After Dmitrovsky's death, new management took over and Baltia quietly rebranded. The airline changed its name to US Global Airways, shifted its planned hub from JFK to New York Stewart International Airport, and announced fresh ambitions for service. New name, new airport, same promise. But in March of 2018, the SEC permanently revoked US Global's stock registration for failing to file annual returns, and the ticker went dead for good. The website domain eventually expired. The corporation went fully defunct. Over 30 years after Igor Dmitrovsky first dreamed of connecting New York to St. Petersburg, there was nothing left. $119 million in accumulated debt, over $40 million in peak market value, 0 passengers, 0 flights, 0 revenue, and the SEC has still never conclusively determined whether Baltia Airlines was the most incompetent airline in history or one of the longest-running financial schemes in American aviation. That question is still open because no one has ever been held fully accountable for where all that investor money money went. If this story kept you watching, this one right here will do the exact same thing.